As the night slowly settles in and everything becomes calm and quiet, it's the perfect moment to listen to a fairy tale, a story that has been softly told from one generation to the next. Tonight, we will be together to hear a tale woven with ancient magic and a most unexpected friendship. A story of a princess and a most unusual companion, who teaches us that true worth lies not in appearance, but in keeping one's word. Imagine a shimmering golden ball, a deep, cool well, and a promise made in desperation. This journey will take us to a world where enchantment is just a whisper away, where every rustle of leaves holds a secret. But before the story truly begins, you should get comfortable. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. So make yourself comfortable, let the outside world fade away, and let tonight's story begin. Settle in, relax, and allow the quiet magic of the tale to carry you through the night. Once upon a time, in a land steeped in legend and shadowed by ancient forests, there stood a magnificent kingdom. Its castle, with towers that kissed the clouds and walls that had witnessed centuries unfold, was home to a king renowned for his wisdom and a queen beloved for her gentle spirit. Together, they had a daughter, a princess whose beauty was as radiant as the morning sun. Her skin was fair, her eyes sparkled like dewdrops on a summer's morn, and her golden hair cascaded around her shoulders like a silken waterfall. She was, in every sense, the apple of her father's eye, cherished and adored beyond measure, growing up in a world of comfort and quiet luxury. Yet, despite all the treasures within the castle walls, all the delicate silks and sparkling jewels, the young princess found her greatest joy in the simplest of things. Not in courtly dances or grand feasts, but in moments of quiet solitude, spent amidst the vibrant bloom of the royal gardens. There, beneath the ancient gnarled boughs of an enormous lime tree, beside a cool, dark well that seemed to whisper secrets from the earth's depths, she would often play, and her most cherished possession, the one item that brought her more delight than any other, was a small, perfectly round, golden ball. It wasn't made of mere gilded wood or painted ceramic. No, this ball was crafted from pure, gleaming gold, catching the sunlight and reflecting it in 1,000 dancing points of light, almost as if it held a tiny sun within its metallic core. It was a gift from her father, a symbol of his boundless affection, and, to the princess, it was simply irreplaceable. She loved to toss it high into the air, watching its brilliant arc against the blue sky, following its descent with bated breath, catching it just before it touched the soft grass. The satisfying weight of it in her palm, the cool, smooth feel of the gold, the way it glinted with every movement. These were the simple pleasures that filled her afternoons. One particularly warm and languid day, as the gentle hum of bees drifted through the blossoms, and the air itself felt thick with the scent of jasmine, the princess was playing her favorite game. Her laughter, light and melodic, mingled with the rustle of leaves as she threw the golden ball higher than usual, a little bolder, a little more carelessly. Caught up in the pure joy of the moment, she watched it soar, a dazzling speck against the azure, higher and higher, feeling a thrill of exhilaration. But this time, something went awry. Perhaps her hand was a fraction off, or a sudden gust of wind caught it. Or perhaps destiny simply had other plans. The golden orb, instead of arcing gracefully back towards her waiting hands, began to descend in an unexpected trajectory. Her eyes widened, her heart giving a sudden lurch. She stretched out her arms trying to correct its path, but it was no use. With a sickening splash, faint but terribly final, the beautiful golden ball vanished. It hadn't merely landed on the grass or rolled into a flower bed. It had fallen directly into the old well. The well, a circular stone structure overgrown with moss, was known to be incredibly deep. Its waters were dark and still, reflecting nothing but the shadowy leaves above, hinting at unfathomable depths beneath the surface. For a moment, the princess stood frozen, her outstretched hands still trembling slightly in the air where her beloved toy should have been. Then a wave of profound sorrow washed over her. She rushed to the edge of the well, peering down into its murky darkness, hoping against hope that she might glimpse a flash of gold, a glimmer of her lost treasure. But there was nothing, only the inky blackness of the water, cool and unyielding, reflecting her own tear-filled face like a distorted mirror. A single tear, then another, traced paths down her smooth cheeks. Her laughter turned to soft whimpers, then to full, heart-wrenching sobs. The golden ball, her only companion in these quiet hours, her most cherished toy, was gone, swallowed by the silent depths of the well. The vastness of the garden, which moments before had been a playground of joy, now felt overwhelmingly empty. Her shoulders shook with grief, a profound sense of loss settling heavily upon her young heart. She sat by the well, her head bowed, her golden hair shimmering sadly in the dappled sunlight, feeling utterly helpless and alone. The silence of the garden, once peaceful, now seemed to mock her sorrow. It was in this moment of deep despair, as her tears mingled with the dew on the grass, that a quiet disturbance rippled through the still water of the well, a faint plop that momentarily interrupted her weeping. Unbeknownst to her, her lamentations had been heard by an unlikely resident of the deep, a creature about to emerge and change the course of her entire life. As the princess wept, her soft sobs echoing faintly against the ancient stones of the well, a tiny ripple broke the glassy surface of the water. Then another, larger, pushing outwards from the dark center. Her eyes, red-rimmed and swollen from tears, caught the movement, and her weeping paused, replaced by a flicker of curiosity. From the murky depths, a head slowly emerged, its two prominent eyes, round and glistening like polished emeralds, blinking steadily in the dappled sunlight. It was a frog, large and green, with skin that looked slick and cool, adorned with fascinating patterns that seemed to shift with the light. He propelled himself gently upwards, resting his forelegs on the moss-covered edge of the well, his gaze fixed directly upon the tear-streaked face of the princess. "What troubles you, beautiful princess?" the frog croaked, his voice surprisingly deep and resonant, like stones tumbling softly underwater, yet perfectly audible in the quiet garden. The sound startled the princess, making her gasp and draw back slightly. She had never heard an animal speak before, let alone a frog. Her surprise quickly turned to a renewed wave of sadness as the memory of her lost treasure resurfaced. "Oh," she stammered, her voice still trembling, "I am weeping for my golden ball. It has fallen into this deep, dark well, and I fear it is lost to me forever." She gestured mournfully towards the water, her lower lip quivering. The frog regarded her with those unwavering, intelligent eyes. "Do not weep, dear princess," he said, his tone remarkably calm and reassuring. "I can help you. I can retrieve your golden ball from the depths of the well. But," he added, a pause hanging in the air, "what will you give me in return if I bring your toy back to you?" The princess, caught between her deep sorrow and a sudden glimmer of hope, looked at the frog, her mind racing. What could this creature possibly want? She imagined jewels, fine clothes, perhaps a pearl from her collection. "Whatever you wish, dear frog," she replied, her voice filled with a desperate earnestness. "My finest jewels, my pearl necklaces, my silken gowns, or even my golden crown that glitters with diamonds. I will give you anything if only you will bring back my golden ball." The frog listened patiently. His head tilted slightly, then shook it gently. "Your jewels, your silks, your crown, none of these do I desire," he said, his voice retaining its gentle, croaking cadence. "What good are such things to a creature like me who lives in the cool, damp earth and the quiet waters? No, what I ask for is something far simpler, yet perhaps more profound. If you promise to love me, to let me be your companion, to allow me to sit beside you at your table, to eat from your golden plate, and to sleep upon your soft, silken bed, then I will dive into the well and bring back your golden ball." The princess listened, her initial surge of hope faltering slightly. To be friends with a frog? To share her meals with a cold, slimy creature? And, worst of all, to have it sleep in her pristine bed? The thought sent a shiver of distaste down her spine. The very idea of its damp green skin against her fine linens, its bulging eyes watching her while she slept, filled her with a profound sense of revulsion. She imagined the unpleasant sensation, the coldness, the unfamiliar texture. Her aristocratic upbringing had instilled in her a certain fastidiousness, a delicate sensibility that recoiled from anything less than perfect. Yet, as her gaze drifted back to the dark, inscrutable surface of the well, and she recalled the dazzling gleam of her lost golden ball, a potent wave of longing washed over her. That golden ball represented so much more than just a toy. It was a connection to her father, a source of innocent joy, a symbol of her carefree childhood. It felt truly irreplaceable. Her longing for the ball, that deep ache in her heart, outweighed her momentary disgust. She reasoned quickly, in the impulsive way of youth, that the frog's demands were surely just empty words. He was, after all, only a frog. He lived in the well, and once he had retrieved her ball, he would surely return to his watery home, content with having helped a princess. He couldn't possibly truly expect to leave his damp dwelling and enter the palace, much less her private chambers. It was an absurd proposition, one that she felt she could safely make without any real intention of fulfilling it. It was a promise born of desperation, a fleeting agreement she could easily dismiss once her treasured possession was safely back in her hands. "Yes, yes," she exclaimed, her voice regaining its former eagerness, though a slight tremor of insincerity might have been detected by a more discerning ear. "I promise you everything you ask, dear frog. Only bring me back my golden ball." A peculiar, knowing glint seemed to flicker in the frog's emerald eyes as he heard her promise. He nodded once, slowly, deliberately, as if sealing an invisible pact. Without another word, he dipped his head and plunged back into the dark water of the well. The surface closed over him, with hardly a ripple, leaving the princess gazing anxiously at the spot where he had vanished. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Her breath hitched in her throat, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Had he gone for good? Was this just a trick? Had she truly promised such outlandish things to a creature of the pond? Just as a fresh wave of despair began to wash over her, a tiny splash broke the silence. And there he was. The frog re-emerged, his green head breaking the surface, and in his mouth, held delicately but firmly, was her glorious golden ball. It gleamed, still wet and shining, a beacon of hope against the dark water. The sight of it filled the princess with an almost unbearable joy. All thoughts of the frog's strange demands, all memory of her reluctant promise, vanished from her mind in that instant. Her golden ball. It was back. She didn't wait for the frog to clamber fully out of the well. As soon as he reached the mossy edge and dropped the ball onto the stone, she snatched it up, her fingers closing around its familiar cool weight with a gasp of pure relief. Clutching her beloved golden ball tightly to her chest, she barely spared a glance for the frog, who remained patiently at the well's edge, his emerald eyes watching her. Her heart still thrumming with excitement, she turned and, without a single word of thanks or a backward look, she ran. She ran through the sun-dappled garden paths, her silken skirts rustling around her, past the fragrant rose bushes and the tall, proud lilies, heading straight for the safety and solitude of the castle. The heavy oak doors of the palace seemed to swing open, as if on their own accord, beckoning her inside. She imagined herself safe within its grand walls, away from the damp garden, away from the speaking frog, away from the strange promise she had so carelessly made. She had her golden ball back, and that was all that mattered. The frog, she assumed, would simply return to his well, to his world of cool water and shaded moss, forgetting all about their brief encounter. After all, what could a frog possibly do? She believed herself entirely free of her hasty agreement, dismissing it as a childish fantasy. But the world of fairy tales often has a way of reminding us that promises, no matter how reluctantly made, often carry a weight and a magic of their own, a magic that sometimes takes on a life of its own. The princess, with her golden ball clutched tightly, burst through the grand archways of the palace, leaving the quiet garden and the patiently waiting frog behind her. Her heart, which had moments ago been heavy with sorrow, now sang with relief and joy. She ascended the sweeping marble staircase, her light footsteps barely making a sound on the polished stone, and sought the sanctuary of her private chambers. There she placed her treasured ball on a velvet cushion, admiring its gleam, completely absorbed in her renewed happiness. The memory of the speaking frog and the outlandish promise she had made faded quickly, relegated to a fleeting, almost dreamlike encounter. To her, it was a closed chapter, a momentary inconvenience necessary to retrieve her precious toy. She spent the rest of the afternoon in blissful oblivion, playing with her golden ball, its familiar weight and shine a comforting presence. The sun began its slow descent, painting the western sky in hues of orange and purple, and the time for the evening meal approached. The great dining hall of the castle was a place of splendor, with towering arched ceilings, tapestries depicting ancient legends, and a long, gleaming oak table set with the finest silver and sparkling crystal. The king, a benevolent but firm monarch, always presided over dinner, ensuring his family gathered together, a tradition he held dear. As the princess took her customary seat beside her father, the aroma of roasted meats and freshly baked bread filled the air. She was just about to lift a delicate silver spoon to her mouth, eager to taste the savory broth placed before her, when a peculiar sound echoed through the grand hall. Plip-plop, plip-plop. It was a soft, rhythmic pattering, as if something wet and heavy was moving slowly, deliberately, up the marble steps leading to the dining hall. The sound was distinct, alien to the refined atmosphere of the castle, and it seemed to grow steadily louder, drawing the attention of the assembled courtiers and servants. The princess felt a sudden, chilling dread creep up her spine. Her spoon clattered softly against her plate. She knew that sound. It was the distinct, wet thud of the frog, making his way, step by deliberate step, up towards the very heart of the palace. A flush of mortification spread across her cheeks as she realized the potential implications. Had he truly followed her? Was he actually going to hold her to that ridiculous bargain? She wanted to shrink beneath the table, to disappear entirely, to somehow unmake the promise she had so carelessly uttered. The plip-plop, plip-plop continued, steadily approaching the heavy oak doors of the dining hall. Then, a voice, deep and resonant, yet undeniably a croak, called out from just beyond the threshold. "Princess, youngest daughter of the king, open the door for me." The princess froze, her eyes wide with panic. She looked around the table, hoping someone else would address the strange demand, that it was a mistake. But all eyes, including her father's, were now upon her. The king, whose face was usually serene and thoughtful, raised an eyebrow, a silent question in his gaze. He had heard the voice clearly and recognized the unique address. "What is this, my child?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "Who calls for you in such a manner?" The princess, her cheeks burning with embarrassment, found herself unable to speak. The full weight of her impulsive promise settled upon her, heavy and inescapable. She knew she had to confess, though the words felt lodged in her throat. She stammered, trying to find an explanation, but her father's steady gaze encouraged her to be truthful. "There sits a frog outside," she finally managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. He helped me retrieve my golden ball from the well earlier today. It had fallen in, and I was weeping. He offered to bring it back, but only if I promised him that he could be my companion, that he could eat from my plate and sleep in my bed. I never imagined he would actually come. I thought he would just stay in the well. She wrung her hands under the table, feeling foolish and trapped. The king listened, his expression unwavering, his eyes thoughtful. He was a man of principle, and the concept of a promise, once given, was sacred in his kingdom, regardless of to whom it was made or the circumstances under which it was uttered. He believed firmly that honor and integrity were the bedrock of both personal character and good governance. He had always instilled in his children the importance of keeping their word, no matter how small or inconvenient the commitment. He looked at his daughter, noting her distress, but his resolve remained clear. "My dear child," he said, his voice gentle but firm, carrying the weight of his royal authority, "you must keep your word. A promise made is a promise kept, regardless of whether it is made to a king or a commoner, or even to a humble frog. If you have promised, then you must honor that promise. Go now and open the door for your companion." His command was absolute. There was no room for argument, no possibility of evasion. The princess knew her father's will was unbending in matters of honor. With a heavy sigh and a feeling of profound reluctance, she pushed herself away from the table. Every step she took towards the grand dining hall doors felt like she was wading through treacle. The plip-plop outside had ceased, replaced by a patient silence, as if the frog knew his moment had come. She reached the heavy, ornate doors, and with a trembling hand, slowly unlatched the heavy bolt. She pulled the door open, just wide enough to reveal a pair of large, glistening emerald eyes gazing up at her from the floor. And there he was, the large green frog, sitting patiently on the threshold, his damp skin catching the candlelight, a strange, knowing expression on his face. "Good evening, Princess," he croaked, his voice calm and polite. "I have come to claim my part of our agreement." The princess could only nod, her throat tight with a mix of shame and resignation. She felt the eyes of her family and the entire court upon her, their whispers a barely audible hum that seemed to amplify her embarrassment. Leading the way, she reluctantly allowed the frog to hop-step his way into the opulent dining hall. A bizarre procession indeed. The courtiers exchanged bewildered glances, some barely concealing their amusement, others simply wide-eyed with astonishment. The frog, however, seemed utterly unfazed by the grandeur or the attention. He hopped steadily, his damp little body moving with an almost regal self-possession, making his slow, deliberate way towards the king's table, towards the princess's very own seat. The king watched the entire scene unfold with a quiet, knowing expression, reinforcing the lesson of integrity he wished his daughter to internalize. The princess knew with a sinking feeling that her life was about to become far more complicated than she had ever imagined possible, all because of a lost golden ball and a promise she never truly intended to keep. The frog, with an air of unhurried determination, continued his slow plip-plop across the polished marble floor of the dining hall, heading straight for the princess's side of the table. The silence in the room was thick, punctuated only by the soft thud of his body and the faint rustle of the princess's silken gown as she moved stiffly back to her seat. Her face was flushed, her eyes darting nervously around, acutely aware of every gaze fixed upon her. It was a scene both absurd and deeply humiliating. The frog stopped directly beside her chair, his emerald eyes blinking up at her. He made no further sound, simply waited, his presence a stark green contrast to the rich fabrics and gleaming silver of the royal dining table. The princess, feeling the weight of her father's expectations and the silent judgment of the court, knew what she had to do. With a shudder of revulsion she tried to suppress, she reached down, her fingers barely brushing against his cool, damp skin, and lifted the frog onto the edge of her seat. But the frog, it seemed, had no intention of staying there. "No, no," he croaked, his voice still that deep, resonant sound. "Not on the seat, dear princess. Lift me up, higher. I wish to sit beside you, right on the table, just as you promised." Another wave of mortification washed over the princess. To have this creature on the immaculate, sacred dining table, amidst the sparkling crystal and delicate porcelain, it felt like an unthinkable breach of decorum, an affront to all that was proper and refined. She glanced at her father, hoping for a reprieve, a sign that this was too far. But the king's expression remained unyielding, a silent reminder of her sworn word. With a deep, almost inaudible sigh, she reluctantly reached out again, her fingers gingerly closing around the frog's damp form, and placed him gently on the edge of the table, directly beside her golden plate. The frog, with what seemed like a satisfied blink, then hopped a little closer. "Now," he croaked, his gaze fixed on her plate. "I wish to eat from your golden plate, as we agreed." The princess stared at her plate, where a delicate portion of salmon and fresh vegetables lay, now seeming entirely unappetizing. Her golden plate, a cherished piece from a royal set, was a symbol of her status, never touched by anything less than the most refined of utensils. And now, a frog, a creature of the pond, was to eat from it. The thought was utterly repulsive. She pushed her plate slightly towards him, then watched with a mix of disgust and fascination as the frog, with surprising agility, stretched out his long, sticky tongue and began to pluck small morsels from her plate, consuming them with quiet, deliberate movements. Each gulp, each tiny chew grated on her nerves, amplifying her sense of degradation. The aroma of her meal, moments ago so inviting, now seemed tainted by the frog's presence. She could barely bring herself to eat. Her appetite completely vanished. The dinner passed in an agonizing blur for the princess. She barely tasted her food, acutely aware of the frog's proximity, his occasional croaks, and the constant, buzzing whispers of the court. When the last course was finally cleared, and the king declared the meal concluded, the princess breathed an internal sigh of relief, hoping that this bizarre ordeal was finally over. Surely, now the frog would bid her good night and return to his watery home. But the frog had other plans. As she made to rise from her chair, he hopped a little closer, his emerald eyes fixed on hers. "Ah, princess," he croaked, his voice still gentle but insistent. "Now that we have eaten, I am tired. I wish to sleep. And you promised, did you not, that I should sleep upon your soft, silken bed?" The princess gasped, a fresh wave of horror washing over her. To eat with him was one thing, an embarrassment to be endured in public. But to share her private sanctuary, her most personal space, her very bed, with this cold, slimy creature, that was an entirely different magnitude of repulsion. Her beautiful bed, draped with the finest silk canopies, adorned with intricate embroidery, and piled high with feather-soft mattresses and pillows, was her haven. The thought of the frog's damp skin, its coldness, its alien texture against her delicate sheets, filled her with an almost unbearable dread. She could practically feel the clammy sensation already, the faint earthy scent of pond water invading her pristine room. She wanted to refuse, to scream, to stamp her foot and declare the whole thing preposterous. But then she caught her father's eye again. He had heard the frog's demand, and his gaze was steady, unwavering, holding the same unspoken command: a promise is a promise. His silent authority was absolute. With a heavy heart, the princess realized there was no escape. She had made a vow, however foolishly, however reluctantly, and her father expected her to honor it. Her pride, her comfort, her very sense of propriety were all secondary to the inviolable rule of keeping one's word. She rose from the table, her movements slow and resigned, feeling as though she were being led to an unimaginable fate. The frog, seemingly content, hopped down from the table and began his slow, deliberate plip-plop once more, leading the way out of the dining hall, towards the grand staircase and up to the princess's private chambers. The entire court watched in stunned silence, a mixture of pity and disbelief on their faces. The princess followed behind him, her head bowed, her golden hair shielding her tear-filled eyes from the curious stares. She felt utterly mortified, trapped by her own hasty words, wishing with all her might that she could rewind the day, that she had never lost her golden ball, never spoken to the frog. As they reached her private room, a spacious and exquisitely decorated chamber, the frog stopped at the foot of her bed. The bed, truly a masterpiece, was a vision of comfort, with its carved wooden frame, its ethereal silk hangings, and its inviting pile of soft linen and down. The frog looked up at her, his emerald eyes seemingly reflecting the moonlight filtering through the tall windows. "Lift me up, princess," he croaked softly, "so I may rest upon your bed as you promised." The princess approached her bed with trepidation, her steps hesitant. She looked at the frog, then at the pristine white sheets, the soft pillows, and a fresh wave of disgust washed over her. Her stomach churned. The very idea of the frog's cold, damp body, so utterly foreign to her world of warmth and softness, touching her most personal space, was almost too much to bear. She hesitated for a long moment, her breath catching in her throat, battling with her profound revulsion. The frog remained perfectly still, a picture of patient expectation. The silence of the room was heavy, broken only by the soft rustle of her dress and the distant hoot of an owl. She closed her eyes, took a deep, shaky breath, and, with an almost imperceptible shudder, reached down to pick up the frog once more. With a profound sense of resignation and a shiver of distaste, the princess bent down and, very carefully, picked up the frog. His skin felt cool and slightly clammy beneath her fingertips, just as she had imagined, and a faint, earthy scent, redolent of damp moss and cool pond water, seemed to rise from him. She held him at arm's length for a moment, her face a mask of barely suppressed revulsion, before gingerly placing him onto her pristine, silken bed. He settled onto the soft mattress, a small green lump against the white linen, his emerald eyes blinking slowly, taking in his new surroundings. "Now that I am on your bed," the frog croaked, his voice a soft murmur in the quiet room, "I am very tired, princess. I wish to lie down and sleep comfortably." The princess stood by the bed, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, watching him with a mixture of disbelief and growing indignation. He wasn't just on her bed, he wanted to sleep in it. With her, the thought sent another wave of revulsion through her. She imagined him hopping closer, his cold body brushing against her, his wet feet leaving faint marks on the delicate fabric. It was utterly intolerable. Her patience, already stretched thin throughout the agonizing dinner, finally snapped. This was too much. Her personal space, her inner sanctum, felt violated by this uninvited, unappealing guest. A hot flush spread across her cheeks, born of anger and humiliation. Her noble upbringing, her royal dignity, the very essence of her princesshood, felt affronted. She had endured his presence at dinner, allowed him to eat from her plate, all under the stern gaze of her father. But this, in the privacy of her own room, was a step too far. The promise, made in a moment of frantic desperation to retrieve her golden ball, now felt like an unbearable weight. A cruel trick. She had been foolish, reckless even, to make such a bargain, and now she was paying a most unpleasant price. A spark of defiance, fueled by sheer disgust, ignited within her. She was a princess, after all. She was not some lowly servant, bound by every whim, certainly not by the absurd demands of a common pond dweller. She looked at the frog, then at the elegant solid stone wall beside her bed, and a reckless, impulsive idea seized her. She would get rid of him. She would simply throw him hard against the wall, and that would be the end of it. He would be gone, and she would finally be free of this wretched, slimy tormentor. The promise, she reasoned in her anger, would be broken, yes, but better to break a silly promise to a frog than endure this continuous nightmare. Her resolve hardened with a sudden, swift movement. Before she could second-guess herself, she reached out and snatched the frog from her bed. Her fingers, though repulsed by the contact, gripped him firmly. For a fleeting second, the frog looked up at her, his large emerald eyes wide with a peculiar expression, perhaps of surprise, perhaps of understanding. But the princess was too consumed by her fit of temper to notice or care. "You loathsome, ugly frog!" she cried out, her voice sharp with a sudden burst of pent-up frustration and disgust. "You will not sleep in my bed. You belong in your well, not here with me." And with all her strength, fueled by her intense revulsion and a desperate need to reclaim her personal space and dignity, she hurled the frog. She flung him with considerable force, not out the window, but deliberately towards the solid stone wall of her bedchamber, hoping that the impact would be final and absolute, that he would simply cease to be. She envisioned a messy splat, a silent, definitive end to her amphibian problem. The cold, unyielding stone, she thought, would solve everything. The frog sailed through the air, a green blur against the rich tapestries and polished wood of her room. The princess watched, her breath held, a strange mix of dread and vengeful satisfaction churning in her stomach. She braced herself for the impact, for the sound, for the messy aftermath. She fully expected to hear a soft, sickening thump, And then, silence, finally. But the sound that followed was not the one she anticipated. It was not a splat, nor a muffled thud. Instead, there was a peculiar, almost magical pop, soft and resonant, like a tiny champagne cork, followed by a faint shimmer of golden light that seemed to ripple through the air, momentarily illuminating the dark corners of her room. The light, brief but distinct, glowed for an instant, then faded, leaving behind a faint, lingering scent in the air, not of damp earth, but something subtly sweet, like jasmine and ancient moss after a spring rain. The princess blinked, confused, her eyes wide. She had thrown a frog. She expected to see a flattened, lifeless amphibian against the stone. But what she saw instead made her gasp, her hand flying to her mouth in utter disbelief. Where the frog had landed, not against the wall, but just slightly in front of it, standing perfectly upright, was no longer a frog. Instead, a young man stood there. He was tall and slender, with noble features, hair the color of rich autumn leaves, and eyes that were still uncannily the exact same shade of glistening emerald green she remembered from the frog. He was dressed in fine velvet clothes, though they seemed slightly rumpled, as if he had just emerged from a long journey or a strange transformation. His expression was one of quiet dignity, perhaps a touch of weariness, but with no trace of anger or resentment towards her. The princess stared, utterly dumbfounded, her anger instantly vanishing, replaced by a shock so profound it stole her breath. Her mind struggled to comprehend the impossible sight before her. A frog, a slimy, croaking amphibian, had transformed into a handsome prince right before her very eyes. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden magical silence of the room. The air still tingled with the faint afterglow of enchantment. The world which moments ago had felt so solid and predictable had just been irrevocably, breathtakingly altered. Her actions born of crude revulsion had inadvertently triggered an ancient magic, unraveling a curse she knew nothing about. The princess stood frozen, her hand still clapped over her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief as she stared at the young man, who now stood where the frog had been. The faint shimmer of golden light had faded, but the lingering scent of jasmine and ancient moss still subtly perfumed the air, a silent testament to the magic that had just unfolded. The prince, for she instinctively knew he must be a prince, was truly handsome. His golden brown hair, now free of any pond water dampness, fell gracefully around a face that was noble and kind. And those eyes, those startling emerald eyes, were precisely the same as the frog's. Yet now they held a depth of human emotion, a quiet understanding, perhaps a touch of weariness, but certainly no anger. He bowed slightly, a polite, courtly gesture that felt utterly surreal in the context of what had just happened. "Thank you, princess," he said, his voice now a rich, melodious baritone, a stark contrast to the frog's croak, yet retaining a certain gentle resonance that hinted at his previous form. "You have broken the spell that bound me." The princess could only stare, her mind reeling, trying to piece together the incredible puzzle before her. "Ah, a spell?" She finally managed to stammer, her voice a mere whisper, still trembling from the shock. "You were a frog?" The words felt utterly ridiculous, yet the evidence stood before her. The prince smiled, a gentle, rueful expression. "Indeed, princess, I was not always this amphibian creature. My story, I'm afraid, is a rather common one in the enchanted parts of this world. I am the rightful heir to a kingdom far from here, beyond the whispering mountains and across the shimmering lakes. But, as fate would have it, a wicked old witch cast a cruel spell upon me. She enchanted me, transforming me into a frog, condemning me to live in that deep, dark well within your royal garden. Her curse was powerful, binding me completely, and it decreed that I would remain in that form until a princess, pure of heart, would take me from the well, allow me to eat from her golden plate, and sleep in her bed. He paused, his emerald eyes holding hers, a flicker of amusement in their depths. And in a final, rather unusual twist of magic, she added that the spell would only truly be broken when the princess, in a fit of frustration or disgust, would throw me against a wall. The princess flushed, remembering her fit of temper, her words of revulsion. The thought of her own crude action, born of such unpleasant emotions being the very key to his liberation, was profoundly humbling. She had not acted out of purity of heart, but out of sheer, unadulterated disgust. Yet here he stood, freed. The irony was not lost on her. I am so sorry," she murmured, genuinely mortified now by her earlier behavior. "I was so angry and you were so, well, you were a frog. I never meant to hurt you." The prince shook his head gently. "No need for apologies, princess. Fate, it seems, has a strange sense of humor. Your anger, your frustration, even your initial revulsion were all part of the witch's twisted design. Without your decisive action, however unpleasant it might have been for both of us, I would have remained a frog, trapped in that well indefinitely." He gestured towards the wall with a graceful hand. "It seems my curse was precisely designed to be broken by such a moment of impulsive release." He then began to explain, in more detail, the plight of his kingdom, left without its true ruler for many years. His family, mourning his disappearance, had sent out search parties, but no one suspected a prince could be found in the guise of a frog. He spoke of the sorrow that had fallen upon his people, the quiet despair that had settled over his once vibrant lands. He had spent countless years in the well, watching the seasons change, listening to the murmurs of the garden, hoping and waiting, clinging to the faint hope that one day a princess would come, and the strange, difficult conditions of the curse would somehow be met. As he spoke, the princess listened, captivated. The initial shock slowly began to recede, replaced by a growing sense of wonder, and, surprisingly, a dawning respect. This wasn't just a frog. This was a prince, a noble being caught in a cruel enchantment, who had endured years of lonely exile. She recalled his patient persistence, his calm demeanor throughout their encounters, even when she was so clearly repulsed. He had kept his part of the bargain, retrieving her golden ball, and had calmly, politely presented his demands, never wavering, never accusing her of her reluctance. His dignity, even in the form of a lowly amphibian, had been remarkable. Looking at him now, in his true form, she saw the true nobility beneath the green skin. His emerald eyes, which had seemed so alien in the frog, now held a wisdom and a kindness that softened his handsome features. She found herself no longer seeing the slimy creature she had so despised, but a brave, patient man who had suffered greatly. He finished his tale, his voice softening. "And so, princess," he concluded, "you have freed me. I am eternally grateful. My kingdom awaits my return, and I must now make preparations to reclaim my throne." The princess, who had initially been so disgusted, so unwilling to share even a meal with him, found her feelings shifting. The image of the ugly frog was being rapidly overridden by the noble, gentle prince before her. She remembered her father's words, "A promise made is a promise kept." And in an unexpected twist, The frog had kept his promise, not just by returning her ball, but by patiently enduring her revulsion, and, ultimately, by revealing a deeper truth about himself, and perhaps about herself too. Her initial abhorrence was fading, replaced by a growing warmth, a genuine sense of admiration for his resilience and the incredible story he carried. The once repulsive creature had become a figure of profound interest, even a touch of intrigue. The magic of his transformation had not only broken his curse, but it had also, subtly, begun to work its own magic on her heart, opening her eyes to the possibility that worth and beauty could reside in the most unexpected places. As the night unfolded, the princess and the newly transformed prince spent hours talking in her chambers. The initial shock had given way to a profound curiosity on her part, and a quiet sense of relief on his. He recounted more stories of his life before the curse, of the vibrant kingdom he had once known, of his family, and the challenges they must have faced in his long absence. He spoke with a quiet passion, his emerald eyes alight with memories, revealing a depth of character that she found increasingly captivating. The princess, in turn, found herself opening up, sharing her own life within the castle walls, her love for her golden ball, and the quiet joys of the royal gardens. With each passing moment, each shared word, the princess's initial revulsion towards the frog, and even her momentary anger, faded further, dissolving like mist in the morning sun. It was replaced by something entirely new, something she hadn't anticipated. She began to see the prince not as the creature she had thrown against the wall, but as the patient, dignified being who had endured years of enchantment. His quiet resilience, his unwavering trust that his curse would eventually be broken, and his gentle understanding of her initial disgust, all endeared him to her. She recognized the true courage it must have taken to approach her, a princess in his frog form, knowing full well the repulsion he would likely inspire. He had placed his entire hope for freedom in her hands, despite her initial disdain. A warmth, subtle yet distinct, began to bloom within her heart. It wasn't the fleeting infatuation of a storybook romance, but a deeper, more genuine feeling, born of shared vulnerability and an unexpected connection. She found herself admiring his strength of spirit, his kindness, and the inherent nobility that shone through his true form. His laughter, now rich and full, filled the room, a joyous sound that banished the lingering echo of her earlier sobs and the frog's persistent croaks. She realized that the golden ball, which had been the catalyst for their meeting, was merely a trifle compared to the profound encounter it had led to. Days turned into weeks, and the prince remained at the royal castle. He formally introduced himself to the king and queen, explaining his lineage and the nature of the witch's curse. The king, a man of great wisdom, listened intently, recognizing the true nobility and character of the young man. He was greatly impressed by the prince's story and by the honorable way he had conducted himself, even in his cursed form. He observed the growing bond between his daughter and the prince with a quiet, knowing satisfaction. He saw the transformation in his daughter, too, her initial fastidiousness giving way to a more open, empathetic heart. The experience had matured her, teaching her that true beauty and worth lay far beyond superficial appearances. During these weeks, the princess and the prince spent countless hours together. They walked through the very gardens where they had first met, now seeing the old well not as a source of sorrow, but as the birthplace of their extraordinary journey. They rode horses through the sprawling royal estates, their laughter carried on the wind. They shared meals, no longer with the frog uncomfortably at her side, but with the prince, whose easy conversation and gentle humor brought a new vibrancy to the dining hall. The princess found herself drawn to his stories, to his perspective on the world, and to the quiet strength that emanated from him. The more she learned of him, the more she admired him, and the more her initial feelings of revulsion were utterly erased, replaced by a deep and genuine affection. The affection blossomed into love, a love as unexpected as it was profound. The prince, too, had been touched by the princess's journey from disdain to compassion. He saw her growing kindness, her willingness to learn, and the genuine warmth of her spirit. He realized that she, in her own way, was as courageous as he, having dared to look beyond appearances, even if initially forced by her father's command. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the castle in a warm golden glow, the prince sought out the king. He spoke of his love for the princess, of his desire to make her his queen, and of his intention to return to his own kingdom to reclaim his throne, with her by his side. The king, delighted by the match, gave his blessing wholeheartedly. He had always wished for his daughter to find a true partner, one who possessed not just outward charm, but inner strength and integrity. The prince, who had endured such hardship and maintained such dignity, was clearly such a man. And so, preparations for a royal wedding began. The castle, which had for weeks been filled with the unusual presence of a frog at the dining table, now bustled with joyous activity. Tailors hurried to create the finest gowns and suits. Cooks prepared feasts fit for a king, and musicians rehearsed joyous melodies. The princess, who had once wept tears of sorrow over a lost golden ball, now shed tears of happiness as she looked forward to a future she could never have imagined. She understood now that the golden ball was just a symbol, a tiny piece of gold, but the promise she had made had led her to a treasure far more precious, true love. The wedding day arrived, bright and glorious, mirroring the princess's radiant joy. She walked down the aisle, her golden hair shimmering, her face alight with happiness, towards the prince, who stood waiting, his emerald eyes filled with adoration. The ceremony was magnificent, a grand celebration of love, perseverance, and the magical twists of fate. They exchanged vows, sealing their commitment, not just to each other, but to the journey they had already embarked upon, a journey that had begun with a frog and a well, and culminated in a love story that defied all expectations. They had found in each other a companionship far richer than any promise made out of desperation, a true partnership forged in the crucible of magic and understanding. After the grand wedding ceremony, filled with music, laughter, and the joyful blessings of their families and kingdoms, the time came for the newly married prince and princess to embark on the next chapter of their lives. The prince, now rightfully restored to his human form and eager to reclaim his duties, knew he must return to his own kingdom, which had long awaited his presence. It was a kingdom far away, across winding roads and through ancient forests, a journey that would take several days. As the royal procession was being prepared for their departure, a magnificent carriage, gleaming with gold and pulled by 8 powerful white horses adorned with plumed harnesses, was brought forth. The carriage itself was a marvel, meticulously crafted, its interior lined with plush velvet and silk, designed for comfort during long travels. But this was no ordinary journey, and thus no ordinary preparations would suffice. Just as the prince and princess were about to step into their carriage, a figure emerged from the crowd, a man of venerable age and dignified bearing. This was faithful Henry, the prince's loyal servant, whose heart had been heavy with sorrow and despair ever since his beloved master had vanished. When the prince had been transformed into a frog by the witch's curse, faithful Henry had been utterly distraught. In his grief, and out of a desperate hope that his master would one day return, he had taken a drastic, heartfelt measure. He had bound his own heart with 3 strong iron bands to prevent it from breaking completely under the weight of his sorrow. These bands, unseen beneath his tunic, were a physical manifestation of his unwavering loyalty and the deep pain he carried. Now, seeing his master not only restored to his true form, but also wed to a beautiful princess, faithful Henry's joy knew no bounds. He approached the prince, his eyes shining with unshed tears of happiness, and bowed deeply. "My prince," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "my heart rejoices to see you well and whole again, and with such a radiant bride." The prince, deeply touched by his loyal servant's devotion, embraced him warmly. "Henry, my dear friend, it warms my heart to see you here whole and well. You must accompany us on our journey back to my kingdom. You shall ride with us in the carriage." And so, faithful Henry joined the royal couple in their magnificent carriage. As the white horses began to pull the carriage forward, slowly at first, then gaining speed as they moved away from the castle gates and onto the open road, a series of remarkable sounds began to echo from within. Crack! Then, a few moments later, crack! And finally, after a little more distance, had been covered. Crack! The princess, startled by the loud, sharp sounds which seemed to emanate from beneath the carriage, looked at her husband with wide eyes. "What was that, my dearest?" she asked, a note of alarm in her voice. It sounded as if the carriage is breaking apart. The prince smiled, a gentle, understanding smile, and turned to look at faithful Henry, who was seated opposite them, his face now alight with profound relief and a happiness that seemed to radiate from him. "No, my love," the prince explained softly. "The carriage is not breaking. Those sounds you hear are the breaking of the iron bands that faithful Henry, my loyal servant, bound around his heart. He did so to prevent it from breaking in sorrow and grief when I was cursed and transformed into a frog. Now, with my curse lifted, and with me restored to my true self, and with you, my beloved princess, by my side, his heart is so full of joy that the bands are bursting from sheer happiness." Faithful Henry nodded, tears now freely streaming down his weathered cheeks, but they were tears of pure joy. Each crack had been a release, a letting go of years of pent-up sorrow, a resounding affirmation of his master's return and restoration. His heart, once so constrained by grief, was now free to swell with immense gladness, bursting its iron fetters one by one. The princess, hearing this explanation, was deeply moved. She understood then the true depth of loyalty and love that the prince inspired, and the profound impact of his return. It was a testament to his goodness, even in the guise of a frog, that such devotion could exist. It further solidified her admiration and love for her husband, the prince who had endured so much. The journey continued, the white horses steadily pulling them forward, carrying them further and further from her childhood home and towards their new life. They traveled through verdant valleys and over rolling hills, the landscape slowly changing as they approached the prince's kingdom. With each passing mile, the prince shared more about his lands, his people, and the responsibilities that awaited them. The princess listened intently, eager to learn and ready to embrace her new role as queen. Upon their arrival, the prince's kingdom erupted in joyous celebration. The people, who had long mourned their missing prince, welcomed him back with open arms, their cheers echoing through the streets. They quickly embraced their new queen, charmed by her grace and kindness, and delighted by the extraordinary story of how she had broken the spell. The prince and princess, now king and queen, began their reign together, ruling with wisdom, justice, and a deep understanding of the unexpected twists and turns that life, and indeed magic, can take. They learned from their extraordinary beginning that true character lies not in outward appearance, but in keeping one's word, in loyalty, and in the courage to see beyond the surface. Their love, born from a humble promise and sealed by a magical transformation, grew stronger with each passing year, and their kingdom prospered under their benevolent rule. The story of the Frog Prince and the princess who dared to break a curse became a beloved tale whispered through generations, a reminder that sometimes the most magical transformations begin in the most unexpected places, even in the depths of a dark well, with a slimy, croaking frog and a golden ball. The night is now drawing to a close, and the whispers of this ancient tale begin to softly fade into the quiet. You've journeyed with the princess and the frog through moments of sorrow, revulsion, and finally into the warmth of true understanding and love. The world outside has settled into a peaceful slumber, much like the ending of our story, where all found their place and harmony. Allow the images of the gleaming golden ball, the patient frog, the wise king, and the loyal Henry to gently drift in your mind like clouds across a serene sky. Let the gentle magic of the story lull you deeper into comfort, knowing that even the most unlikely beginnings can lead to the most beautiful endings. Your eyelids may feel heavy now, and your breath soft and even. Rest well, knowing that every tale, like every dream, holds a lesson, a touch of wonder, and a promise of peace. Let the quiet magic carry you into a night of profound and restful sleep. Sweet dreams.